Hello and welcome to this webinar, which focuses on the theme of wealth, values, culture, and education, and whose prestigious guest is Dr. Juliette Torabian. Juliette Torabian is a postdoctoral researcher in sociology of education and the deputy team leader in the European H 2020 project, pioneered pioneering policy and practices in tackling educational inequality. She is a senior expert in international development, education planning, policy, and gender equality, with more than 2 decades of experience across Asia and Africa. She is the regional editor at the Journal of International and Comparative Higher Education and an advisory editorial board member at the Journal of Sustainability and Climate Change, University of Michigan and Cambridge Scholars Publishing. She is a member of the British and Luxembourg Educational Research Association and the UNESCO Inclusive Policy Lab. Her research focuses on comparative higher education, sociology of education, human and gender rights, political sociology, and sociology of environment and climate change. Thank you, Dr. Torabian, for accepting my invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naji, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today on the subject of my book. And it's a pleasure, in fact, to be presented by Amaken, which is the Moroccan Association for Improvement of Quality of Education. Thank you very much, Dr. Naji.
You have recently released a book titled Wealth, Values, Culture and Education, Reviving the Essentials for Equality and Inequality. How can you tell us about this book?
Well, thank you for your question. So I have prepared some slides that I'm going to share with you today for everyone to have a better overview of what we are going to talk about. I think that is going to be helpful to all our audience. So if you can just give me a second, please. I think it was shared. Is it shared, Dr. Naji, or should I share it? Yes, okay. So I'm going to share it myself here.
Okay.
I think it is shared. Is it shared?
Okay.
All right, very good. So yes, thank you for introducing the book. The book's name is Wealth, Values, Culture and Education, Reviving the Essentials for Equality and Sustainability. As you kindly mentioned, the book has been published by the Springer series in May 2022, and it is available online in ebook format and hardcover. In this talk, I am going to very briefly give you an overview of why this book, why I actually wrote it, what is the main theme that is discussed throughout the book, and what objectives I have pursued. And of course, as you mentioned, we are going to continue with a question and answer session afterwards. So why this book? The first thing that I can share, and I have written it in the first section of the book, is that I've been, as you kindly introduced me, working for the past more than 2 decades in international development across different settings, different cultural and political settings. What has fascinated me in all these years is understanding the role of culture and education in each context, how there are continuities with the past and how there are disruptions, how values are constructed, how wealth, the meaning of wealth, knowledge are different at every different context. And of course, the social conditions that create vulnerabilities and inequalities have been at the heart of what I do. Therefore, I had this feeling that I'm at a stage that I should be writing something about this. But the idea of the book was crystallized in this situation that I'm sharing now. So it was during the COVID-19 confinement, and I found myself standing in front of this photo that you can see in France, my country. Well, as you can see in this photo, there are ribbons that prohibit access to the cultural section. On the other side, there are all the non-essential gadgets that one does not really need for having a better life available without any restriction for everyone. There was also that photo of Voltaire, which is my favorite philosopher, with a mask on his face. That was intriguing for me to see there's a mask over the mouth of a philosopher whose ideas may not
Dr.
be
Torabian,
appreciated now.
Dr.
Yes,
Torabian,
yes.
your presentation is not in slideshow.
It is not what, Dr. Naji? I'm sorry.
Slideshow.
Yes. Can you see the slideshow? Is it okay? Can you see it now?
We can see your presentation, but not in mode slideshow.
Okay, all right.
Diaporama.
Well, I did change that, but I don't know how to do that. Let me see. How about now? Is it okay now, Dr. Naji?
No.
No. Okay, so what can we do? Let me end. So the display meeting, swap presenter view in a slideshow. Okay. I can end that. Would you like to share from your part, or do you want me to share again? How about now? Is it good now?
Yes. Okay. Now.
Okay. All right. Good. So it is visible. Okay. So I'll go ahead. So I was standing in the middle of this supermarket, and as you can see, there are ribbons on the cultural part. No access was allowed. And there is also the photo of Voltaire with a mask around his mouth, which connotes to the situation of COVID, where many artists, writers, and of course, people who were involved in cultural and in literary works were not allowed to go out and to perform and to disperse their ideas. So I felt this urge of writing this book, and I thought that this is a very good moment, because the very basic question was to understand what is essential and what is non-essential, how they are socially constructed. So the topics that I have evoked in this book started from this point of view. Building
Please,
on
the
knowledge.
next slide, please. The next
Yes,
slide.
I went to the next slide. Can you see that now?
Not yet.
I don't know. I think there is a problem with the time. And now, can you see it?
Uh, Now you are in the introduction slide.
Yes, that is the right one. So, in the introduction of the book, thank you, Dr. Naji, for letting me know if everyone can see this. It is a little bit interrupted, but that's a very kind remark from your side. Thank you for that.
Okay.
So, in the introduction, I actually discuss all these things, and I say, why has economic wealth and symbolic capital gained such a prominence in our lives? And how did we arrive at considering culture as non-essential during the COVID-19 confinement? Of course, the question is it can have a very direct response. Well, people could live without culture, but they couldn't live without what they were supposed to eat. That's true. Uh, but at the same time, labeling culture as non-essential, changing education into online fast food deliveries, what happened during COVID. That didn't happen overnight and just because of COVID. There should have been, I think at least, a sort of a long-term social construction of values that led us during the COVID to think or assume that these two are non-essential to some extent. I mean, culture was called really directly non-essential across all countries, and education, well, of course, was changed into online deliveries as we all panicked and wanted only to continue teaching online. So this is what I discuss in the first in the introduction to the book. Then I continue in the next chapter talking about how values have changed from the Middle Ages till 1970s, and how in construction of these values and understanding of wealth, of knowledge, of power, how culture and education have played a very important role. They have never been non-essential before. They have always been essential, either in the hands of the powerful in order to brainwash people, in order to, create their own dominant ideologies, or also in the hands of artists, literary writers, philosophers, even creating social revolutions, which is why we see, for example, books were burned in many fascist eras of our history, because books were threatening, because books were valued and they could create social change. So the second chapter is all about this, and I have tried to have a global view. I do not claim any global knowledge, but I have taken different examples from Japan, from the Arabic Nehda, for example, from in the 19th century, from the Persian Revolution in 1905, from the way colonialism has had an impact, and how literature and culture and education has, in fact, been a powerful instrument in the hands of artists and philosophers and politicians in order to change things. So, in fact, chapter 2 is a review of the importance of the role of education, their social and political role of education and culture, and how through them and by them, values, wealth, poverty, power, and everything can be defined at different stages of our history. I stop in that chapter 2 and I till 1970s, because I think since 1960s, 1970s, we have entered a new era of capitalism. Not that capitalism has not existed, it has existed before, but it is where this idea of free market, neoliberal market, and globalization is pioneered by political characters such as Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And in this chapter, I try to talk about how capitalism has changed, has the power of changing our value systems. And I explain it. I call capitalism the Trojan horse because it promises happiness, it promises a better life, but in fact, all the difficulties of climate change, of inequalities that we have today is partly, not entirely, but at least to a good part, due to this capitalist understanding of values. So I talk about how capitalism has survived, how it has changed its face in order to adapt to what people think at every period and what people want, and how it has sold its ideas, adapting what religions do. Like it has rituals, it has images, it has temples, supermarkets, for example, shopping malls are the temples where memories are made, where people go there with their children. Symbolism of all the things that are happening now online with different influencers, for example, selling items that change absolutely nothing in one's life, but people go and still buy them. And the promise of this happiness that any person wants to achieve by working hard, by meriting the kind of promises that capitalism gives them. In this chapter, I also talk about two other things, and that is the metamorphosis of the meaning of being and freedom under capitalism. I'll give you one very small example. Like in the capitalist understanding of the world, choice is a very important thing. We say, you're free, you have different choices. You can go to a supermarket and you can have, for example, different kinds of dressings for your salad. And that is your freedom to choose. So freedom is somehow tweaked from your political participation, from your freedom to think, from your freedom to be the way that you choose to be, but it is somehow reframed in free to buy. Therefore, I asked the question. We have moved from the Descartesian "I think, therefore I am" to "I buy, therefore I am." So there is a metamorphosis of the meaning of being and freedom. And there are also ideas of GDP, big pie, rising tide that I have explained are completely irrelevant to the prosperity and sustainability of our societies. So that is chapter 3. And then, of course, I come back to the discussion of education and culture in order to show that capitalism as a dominant regime of truth is not the only ideology that transforms and instrumentalizes education and culture. In fact, there are other ways of thinking, like authoritarian contexts also instrumentalize education and culture. And in this chapter, I talk about why do we buy into this dominant ideologies, be it capitalism, be it any autocratic idea. Why do we buy in it? So there's a little bit of discussion on the limits of our brain, how we classify everything to learn, how we in fact need to belong, and how we get into a comfort zone, or where we do not want to listen to other voices, when we do not understand other voices that are against what our dominant groups say. And these are the ideas that the capitalism actually builds upon in order to be the dominant ideology in our societies. But I also nuance this, and I say that masses are not simply subject to these ideologies. They also play their part, sometimes, adapting, normalizing, internalizing these regimes of truth, and sometimes fighting against it. And that is where they exercise their power, for example, in informal culture. And that I have observed as I have traveled in different parts of the world, where there is this authoritarian approach to instrumentalizing education and culture in countries. I have seen how people try to educate their students differently in the informal heart of their houses, or through exercising music, for example, if it is forbidden. So there is this power struggle between the masses and the dominant groups, but normally we call them dominant because they take over the ideologies at large. And of course, because the main focus of this book is on capitalism rather than anything else, I go back to the 1960s and 1970s, and I talk about the neoliberal capitalism form that was created in Chile, and that was exported then praised by the US and the UK, and then exported to other parts of the world. And how, in fact, the student protests of the time seemed to be a threat, and it was actually called crisis of democracy, and how there was a decision to to transform the role of culture and education so that it wouldn't create those students' protests, and it would deviate the mass ideas from social and political engagement to what capitalism actually wants people to be. So that is the discussion of this chapter. Of course, I do seek some objectives in this book. And these objectives are created and they are talked about in the last two chapters. So if we criticize a situation, I think that is my tendency to be very practical, I think. So if we criticize a system, what do we do then? Where do we go? So, okay, I have criticized the impact of capitalism and how it has metamorphosed culture and education. So now what? Well, there is an urgency in the air. We are in the Anthropocene age where we can decide to change the future of our Earth, planet Earth. There are sustainable development goals out there. There are recent reports on inequalities, poverty, climate change. Everyone is saying we have to move. So yes, okay. So there is this urgency, and there is this need for a new social, ecologically just contract. But for that, I think our perceptions of wealth and values should change. And because of that, in this chapter, I have proposed 8 different types of wealth. Economic wealth is only one. We are not going to deny that. But there are other forms of wealth that we may have forgotten because of all the in fact, metamorphosis that has happened under this hegemony of the capitalist worldview in our world. There is political wealth, there is cultural wealth, there is social wealth, there is learning wealth, there is educational wealth, there is also cultural wealth, technological wealth, natural wealth. These are all different forms of wealth that we have undermined because we have given prominence only and only to economic wealth. So my intention in this book is not only to criticize, but to give solutions, to propose solutions, not to give, of course, to propose. So the big wealth of pie is something that I have briefly introduced in this chapter. And I'm happy to say that this is going to be a book on its own. And I'm, in fact, in the process of drafting that. And it is going to be published in 2023. We are hoping. I'm hoping. So this is the upcoming book. With the editor of the book, we decided that this is too important a subject to be only one chapter of a book. Therefore, this is going to be a book itself. So if any one of our audience is going to read the book, you will see that this chapter is somehow concise, and I have only given some hints about what the whole idea of the big wealth pie is, but it will be, of course, later on developed into a book on its own. And in the last chapter, the only argument that I have is that we need to be constructing a narrative proper to our own generation and our context. Quantities of our efforts should accumulate in order to shift the quality of what we consider essential and what is really non-essential in our lives, individually, but also at institutional level, at national level, and even at global level. So there is a need to transform education and culture and reviving their essential roles in our lives, not considering education is only to train employees, not considering that culture is only celebrity culture. No, they have other aspects to them that we have forgotten, and we need to revive those. So I give a few practical, in fact, hints here. To transform education, our teaching methods should change. The content should change. One of the ideas that is very close to my heart, in fact, and I've talked about it in this book, is teaching ignorance. It's something that has been done in Columbia University since 2006. Instead of saying, I know, and I have done this, and I know this, and I'm going to share my experience with you, as a scientist, as an academic, coming to classes in universities and saying, this is what I do not know. Go ahead and innovate. Go ahead and create new ways of understanding these things that we are lacking in our world. So that is one a very short advice. I mean, not advice, like solution that I propose humbly in this part. But also, the whole idea is to transform our perceptions. This is my theory in this book: transforming our perceptions of what is to be valued and what is essential and what is not. Transforming then, based of this new perceptions, our policies and practices, and to rethink the way that we participate in education, in culture, and how public policies should actually be revised in order to let us transform these approaches that are already there for education and culture. So the question at the end is again about what is essential and what is not essential, which is about our being. So the question, the Shakespearean question, in fact, is very relevant to our situation now: to be or not to be, because our being is associated with what is essential and what is not essential, and that is how we can, in fact, progress, I think. So that is what I had to say about the book. I hope you can buy and read it and enjoy it. I have the link is here. The French version is to be published, I'm hoping, by the end of this year or early 23. And there will be a book signing event in Geneva. There are 2 or 3 places that we have in mind. I have not yet decided. So any of the audience, if you have any suggestions, I'm open to suggestions. And thank you very much for your time. I am now available to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Dr. Torabian, for this very interesting presentation. Now I invite you to interact with the questions and comments of our viewers. The first questions: what position you prefer in the old debate between supporters of a rationality freed from all value and those of respect for cultural values.
Dr. Nadi, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question. Would you mind repeating the question, please?
What position you prefer in the old debates between supporters of a rationality freed from all value and those of respect for cultural values?
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I haven't entered that kind of argument in the book. There is a reason for that. As I said, the book was written as a historical impulse was there in order to have a reflection on our values. Cultural. I have talked about cultural wealth in the big wealth pie, and the argument that I have on cultural wealth here is that cultural wealth is when we can create situations in any context where people can enjoy justice, equality, equity in access, in participation, having their voices heard. So if there is a cultural habit that we fail to change, and because of that, there are parts of our societies that are being sidelined, which means we are in fact depriving ourselves from a collective intelligence that we can build on, because we are sidelining parts of the intelligence that exists in our society by, not reconsidering some of the cultural habits that we have, that is, for example, harming animals, that is harming women, that is harming children, that is harming men. I sometimes even talk about gender equality in my classes, and I always say to my students that if you as a woman, you think that, for example, this rule or that policy is against you and your equality is undermined, it means on the other side, men are also suffering. So if a culture is there and creating gender inequality, it means everyone to some extent is in fact affected by it. And the whole idea of culture, I mean, if we go to the root of the word culture, culture, cultiver in French, which comes from the Latin word, it means to cultivate something, to create something. So why do we take culture as something that is static, something that cannot be changed? Sometimes we have that kind of attitude. No, it is something that we have inherited. I'm talking about intangible cultural heritage. No, this is something that we have inherited. So if we change it, we will lose our identities. But it is our identity. It is within the word itself. And every generation before us has made some tweaks and changes to it. If we do not touch what is there, then people would do it on a daily basis, no matter what. We have seen it in our societies. There is a rule that everyone says, well, okay, from now, from time to time, we are going to respect that. It's a rule, it is there, but we are going to live our lives otherwise. So why this duality? Culture by essence is something that should be changed. So it is upon us to, I think, to have the capacity of course, respecting the wisdom of the past, not to, and then there is these disruptions. You have seen it, I'm sure many of you. that there is this disruption between the new generation and the previous generation. But or there is, for example, sometimes I'm sorry to say this, but trashing everything that is traditional. No, not that, not at all. Keeping them, but tweaking them little by little as our understandings of life changes. I think culture is something that lives through us and with us. It is not a static. So therefore, there should be our approach to it should be like that. I hope I have answered your question. Thank you very much, Dr. Schreiber. It's very kind of you. Yes, there is a review that is going to be done in the that is going to be published in the Journal of Student Affairs in Africa. I'm very much thankful to the support of Dr. Birgit Schreiber, who is an expert with 25 years of experience in Africa and in education and in social justice. So thank you very much for that. The concept of well-being and philosophical counseling in the context of virtue ethics. I think virtue education is the key to rich. Yes, as you mentioned, it should not be only a project. No, exactly. So it is. Thank you, Felice, for your comment. I'm getting old, I have to, I have to read with my glasses. But it gives me more authority as a university professor. You've seen that, Yes, Felice, thank you very much. Exactly. So my theory is, which you're going to see in the next book. As I said, I haven't had enough room to develop this idea. So it is all about changing perceptions. Once the perceptions are changed, your perception, for example, of a reality is changed. My perception is changed. The other one's perception of reality is changed. And then this accumulation of these small changes can in fact be a push factor. Why do we always think of the big push to be from governments, from being something top down? No, it can be vice versa. It is in the quantities of our shifted perceptions that we can, in fact, change policies and practices. And there is a continuum. So there's a feedback. We will see if those perceptions are right, if they are working in policies and practice through our active participation. If it is not working, then again, we will change. That is how the life would go on. So thank you very much for this, Phyllis. It's a very nice comment, and I agree with it completely. Transforming education and teaching content are based exactly on what is this just a directive of the changes coming out of zone, or is it something else? All right, okay. So if you are, thank you very much, Mr. Twali Hamid. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name properly. Yes, transforming education. Okay, that is something that we educationists and experts in education have been talking about it, I think, for the past 20, 30 years. So we have this intention always of transforming. Politicians also do that and use it, in fact, when they want people to vote. So they say, the first thing that I'm going to do is to change education, which normally doesn't happen. So that is why it's a perpetual transformation that we are following. Now, that was joke apart. As I said, if there is this, okay, so I'll give you this example. For the past 20 or 30 years, we have been talking of reorienting the objective of education into what? Into training employable, flexible people who would be global nomads, going anywhere, working within their own fields without having any understanding of other fields. So there is this over-professionalization, over-individualization. And this has been, in fact, put on the shoulders of education systems all around the world, saying you need to prepare people for the job market. So what about other things? What about education? Or for example, another obsession most recently has been with gadgets, adding very good big screens to the classroom would change the quality of teaching. No, it doesn't. It is all in the content of what we teach and in the pedagogies, where we teach our students to think, to question. Questioning is something that I see sometimes in many of my students, coming from outside Switzerland, for example, saying that this is not something that they have the habit of. Questioning what I say in a class, or questioning the topic that is being analyzed in the class. So it takes us some time in order to be in the class with each other and start rethinking, why do we do this, why do we do that, why do we say this, why do we say that. So you see, so that is transforming education, I think. Transforming education for sustainable development, which is a very big topic, which is important now, but how do we do that? So there are many good initiatives taken, but we need to know that it is in the perceptions of teachers of their own role. So I invite you to, and perhaps you have already done so, to read Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So it is in the way that I treat my students and I behave, in the class, where there is participation, where there is the opportunity to express themselves. That's one thing. Then it is about the content. Am I teaching them the capacities to think and to change? Or am I telling them, memorize, get assessed, get your degree, goodbye, have a good life, get a job? You see, so that is what I'm talking about. Again, it's a very short paragraph that I have on these, but that is the main idea. And thank you for your question. Okay, what do you think about education as capabilities building, development? Yes, Messer Abdelrazak Mezayan. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name properly. Thank you for your question. Yes, okay. So there is a big topic between skills and competencies. So we have been fighting with these prominence of skills over competencies, I think, for the past 20 decades, and that has been put on our plates as educationists by big organizations, for example, such as OECD, where skills have been more prominent compared to competencies. I think we are past that era. But capabilities, I'm absolutely for that. And I have actually drawn on Amartya Sen's ideas in talking about learning wealth in the framework that I have proposed. Yes, capabilities in order to function and to be. That is the question. That is what the education should be. So I am for that. If your question is about this, yes, I am absolutely for that. And I have, in fact, as I said, developed the idea of learning wealth, because I have made a difference between educational wealth and learning wealth. I have made them different. One is with the infrastructure policies, and the other one is about learning. And there has been a report in the past 2 years on learning poverty. So if there is a learning poverty, on the other side there is learning wealth. What is that? That is something that I have tried elaborating in my framework, and it is all about creating the basis for capabilities through pedagogies and through the content, through the way that we teach our students. I hope I have answered your questions. Okay, so the internationalization of education means that powerful countries use a school to impose their culture on the determinant. Okay, is that a question or a comment?
Question.
That's a question. Okay, all right. Okay. Yes, it is true, but it is not only the powerful countries, it is any dominant ideology that can happen within the borders of a nation, where you have one party, one group of people with their own ideology that they impose on students through textbook. I mean, it's very easy to go to, and I have had the chance to look at textbooks in many different places. The way women are presented, the way men are presented, the way, for example, as you say, indigenous cultures are presented. We had a very good, I can refer you to a very good study in Germany that was done, in fact, on the differences of textbook presentations in early childhood education books in Germany. So this was a conference in September. You can check it online, where I was presenting on the integration of refugees in higher education in Europe. But there was a professor from a university in Germany who was talking about exactly this, of how presentation in textbooks is very important. And as I said, I mean, I cannot emphasize this enough. I think it is not only powerful countries, but any powerful group. So it can be a group inside the borders of a country that does that in order to create this, to provide this image, to make it to normal, and to lead to internalization of that image by every student. So the end result, if we think that the students are the input, and this is the education box, and we have an output, for them, it is they enter this education system, we train them as we want them to be, as loyal people to this idea, and then that is the output that we want. So it can happen anywhere, at any level. I hope I have answered your question. I have my glasses on, so other questions. Yes, please. When we think that encounters of different cultures, specifically when we think of refugees, immigrants, and vulnerable groups, the virtues education provides accountability and causality and makes it possible to create an environment. Yes, ultimately it provides, yes. So, Felice, I do agree with you. My emphasis, and this is something else that I teach usually, ethics. My emphasis is on ethics, not necessarily on morality. So I understand exactly what you're saying. Ethics of in the way that it is objective, in the way that it is universal, in a way that it is applied to every person, regardless of their backgrounds. So yes, it does provide the opportunity to live in unity and integrity. But then it is about changing our cultural perceptions, perhaps, in order to be able to produce an enabling environment for this kind of education to succeed in our societies. That's also another thing. So we do not only need the enabling pedagogies, but also enabling environments. Thank you for your question. I mean, your comment. The Anthropocene is used to describe when human activities started to have an impact on the planet's climate and ecosystem, to what values the school must she educate to reverse this trend. Okay, so yes, it is used to describe when our activities has had an impact. And it is also, so it's a dual meaning. It has a dual meaning. It means if we have had an impact, it means we can reverse that impact. It is all about the agency of human beings in the whole um, issues of climate change and unsustainable behavior that we have created. So yes, the schools can teach very basic. I mean, from the very beginning, very basic competencies in order to make students capable global citizens. We talk about global citizenship a lot, but is it part of our history books? Is it part of our geography books? Do we uh, try to do nation building in our education system, or do we produce global citizens? How do we understand our progress? Yes, of course, every nation would. We had a discussion, now that you're referring to this, about the use of language and how one language can become can play a hegemonic role over other languages, or one culture over other cultures. The whole idea is that capitalism has transformed the way we value uh, nature, for example. If we talk about GDP, which is something that I have explained in this book, we talk about GDP. So there was a time 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that World Bank or the IMF started praising all those countries that had a high GDP. A high GDP is using resources of that country. Now, in 2018, we have a report written by the very same World Bank saying, oh no, GDP is not a good thing because it doesn't talk about all the resources that goes into producing that GDP. So we are losing our natural resources. We are talking with Amaken from Morocco, so I'm going to refer to one very important issue. For example, lemon that is produced in Morocco takes 3 liters, every lemon would take 3 liters of water, I think, in a country where water is scarce. And then it is transferred to another part of the world, sold with, I don't know, 50 cents, for example. So where does the value of that water goes? Yes, of course, business persons are progressing. Yes, of course, the country is progressing because it is able to export, but it is also depleting its natural resources. So we need to come up with new understanding of what is our wealth for our nations and for the world. And these are the things that we can discuss in our classes. At least these are things that we discuss in our, in my courses. I try to do this and in my classes, and I'm sure many others of you would also do that. This push, for example, that we have had from consumers in the past 2 years towards more natural products, organic, bio. Yes, it has created this greenwashing effect in businesses, for example, but it has also pushed them because quantities of our perceptions has changed, and therefore the quality of production policies in response has also changed. So I think these are the values that the school can try to teach to students. Education for sustainable development is something that has been out there since 2005, when I remember we launched it at UNESCO. People did not actually follow up on it. That's the truth. But it is time that we do that. And I know many education systems are actually doing that. Many teachers are doing that, even if they are not. These topics are not in their books, but I know many of them are doing it. Some people are not yet, but we need to, understand that each one of us has a role, and that we can create that narrative for our generation, which is going to change things. I hope I have answered your question. Sorry for being long. That is the symptom of university lecturers. Okay. Many say that capitalism is in an impasse today, but remain perplexed concerning the alternative. What can you tell them? Okay. No, I would say no. Capitalism is, I'd be very clear about that. Capitalism is not capable of changing. It has gone through some aesthetic surgeries in the past 200 years. Okay, so it has been changed. It has changed from classical form to, well, the social liberalism was good, and then it has changed into neoliberalism. From that, it has changed into techno feudalism, and then it has changed into green growth. It changes its appearance, but beneath that, it is the same wolf. It is the same mentality of depleting our resources common to our humanity for benefits, for profit. Then the question is where they are going to use all the money that they are gathering if the whole world is ruined. But apparently they have plans to go to another planet. And I have heard some people have been praying for them to leave the earth, leave it to us so that we can be happy on this planet earth. I'm joking, but that is, I don't think that capitalism is able to change unless our perceptions would change, unless we will, I mean, it's very simple individually. How are we going to change our approach? Is it, what is value in our lives personally? That's a question that we should be asking ourselves. And then, well, of course, at national levels, at institutional levels, what are the values that we want to transfer to our students and to our children? So I don't think that capitalism is capable of changing. It may have, again, some kind of a aesthetic surgery, as it has done. This green growth is the latest one. So there is this greenwashing going on, but I don't think that it is really going to be changing. It's incapable of that because it has only one thing in mind: profit, 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 money, money, money. I hope I have answered your question. Okay, democracy also seems to be loss of speed, and the elections are often boycotted by a large part of the population. Yes, that is what has happened in many parts of the world, in Europe as well, where we have the rise of fascism, nationalism, and hallucinating ideas that are changing the history to their own benefit. Yes. Is this a crisis of confidence in the political? Yes, it is. But at the same time, yes, I mean, there are different angles to this. One is, yes, people are losing trust in what politicians are saying because it is always the same blah, 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 blah. It's all over the world. So people are losing interest in that. That's one thing. The second thing is, because, and I have explained that in the chapter that I have written on the metamorphosis of education and culture after 1960s students' protests and the crisis of democracy. So, okay, how do we control people? I'm sure you are all available. You're all aware of Maslow's pyramid of needs. If you are working decently, gaining your salary, and at the end of the month, you do not arrive at making ends meet, and there is this politician that is promising you a better future and better this and better that, but it is not working, and you're not seeing its effect in your daily life, of course you're going to lose interest in what they are saying. That's one thing. The second thing is, little by little, through this hegemony of capitalist ideas, in addition to authoritarianism, so there's a combination around, on the spectrum between capitalism and fascism. So you have different levels of autocratic countries, of authoritarianism, of theocracies, of mild, soft capitalism to very hard capitalism, and sometimes a combination of both. which is an unholy marriage between a dominant group and capitalism in some countries, um, you see that there is this uh, lack of engagement that has been gradually woven into the very fabric of our societies. Unionism is something that capitalism has dismantled all around the world. You see now that, I mean, there were scandals, for example, about one company, Amazon, some years ago, that they said, they're following their employees so that they wouldn't unionize. France is still the only place that we have some strikes. We have some unionism in some other European countries as well. In some countries, unions, teachers' unions, if they say our salaries are not enough, the teachers can be taken to jail. So, of course, people are taken away from their capability to engage in politics and to imagine other ways of being collectively. So that, hand in hand with you being, tangled in the daily hassles of making ends meet, worrying about future, paying the bills, your children, and all that. Of course, you will be fed up with all the political system, and you say, you know what, it's not me. I'm not going to do it. I have done it at my time. It's now for the new generation, and the new generation are always with likes, which is the safest way of saying yes to something, or dislikes, which is again online, another safe way of saying I don't like this. There's no involvement. I'm not talking about revolutions. I'm talking about subversion of a dominant idea through quantities of adversary ideas that is there to change. So I think that capability has been wiped away from our societies, and there is this, of course, mistrust in so poverty, learning. Poverty is another thing. There are researchers on the fact that lack of learning and, of course, adequate level of language leads to violence. So yes, language has been something that we have been losing. I mean, so there are different aspects to it. Culture, for example, if it is something that is defeating the dominant ideology, it can be prosecuted in some countries. So I understand your question, and I do agree with it. Yes, culture is a community and collective term. What happens to it when we increase individual living and learning in the age of digitalization? Your thoughts? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Yes, of course. It is collective, yes. But I think, as I said, it is, age of digitalization is a tricky one, because we are further individualized, we are profiled, there's no privacy, we have I can invite all the audience to take a look at that documentary, Social Dilemma, which shows that we are living in a techno-feudal era. And even there are profiling of what we search in order to prevent us from going on the streets, or anticipating if there would be any protests or anything. That was published in 2020, I think. Anyway, I do believe that we have a role, Birgit. I think every individual has a role, and I do not want to see anyone saying, "Oh, I'm only one individual. What can I do?" For example, and I think that one of the things that education today can do. So, education 4.0 is another topic that is very, very much fashionable these days because of the fourth industrial revolution. And it only talks about preparing students to, for example, be able to code, to understand computer, to understand virtual reality, to be able to program, deep learning, and all that. But it doesn't say how could they understand and distinguish fake news from real news? How can they understand the reality from fake ideas that are being part of the propaganda of different groups online? It doesn't say that. And I think it is the responsibility of all educators in order to create opportunities for students to understand these and to train them, to educate them on the capacity to question, because they just see it and they accept it. And then, of course, one by one, if we gather, it's a very simple thing. Quantities gather, and they make a sea. Therefore, I think every individual has a role in changing culture, in changing education. I think everyone has one.
Just two more questions.
Yes, thank you, Birgit. Can we speak of another form of wealth linked to spirituality in its different aspects, and how can it help better value human values? Okay. Uh, Spirituality in its different aspects. Okay. Well, I have not talked about this because I'm not an expert in that area. So I haven't talked anything about spirituality, because then it would be different across different borders. Then it would be different amongst different people practicing it. People have different relations with what can be an umbrella word of spirituality. So in a very practical way, at three levels: individuals, institutions, nations, and then the world, the regions, and then the world. We can create this change of perceptions on a continuum amongst these levels for very concrete ideas of wealth that can be applied to everyone, regardless of where they are, regardless of what they think, I mean, what they believe in spiritual terms, um, and so that it can be applied for us to create a new socially and ecologically just contract. So I have not actually talked about that, and I prefer not to, because I'm not an expert in that regard. But for value systems, I think they are socially constructed. They are individually constructed, but then also collectively constructed. And we are at a moment of our history where we need new values in order to change away from this capitalist understanding of the world. Okay, can we speak of another form?
Last questions.
Yes, are you to teach with national language or to teach on the pretext that it is dominant? I didn't say that. No, well, again, in some national contexts, you have the dominant group that prohibits other languages of being taught, because that is the way they build their nations. Yes, there are many discussions about English being, the taking over all the other languages. I think it can be both. You should be able. I mean, we are living in a world that is connected. The more languages you know, including English, including your national languages, and two or three or four. I mean, my students usually talk 4 or 5 languages, which means they can think in 4 or 5 different ways, which means they know 4 or 5 different ways of understanding the world. That's great. The more languages, the more proficient we are in them, uh, it, it's a better thing, I think. Okay, so the last question, or is it the last question?
Thank you too so much for your
Thank you.
excellent presentation and your relevant answers to the questions. I hope to be able to welcome you when the French version of your book will be published.
Thank you very
Thank
much, Dr. Naji, for your invitation. Thank you very much to all of you who were here and you participated very actively. If you would like to get in touch with me, I'm in LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn, so you can message me there and we can continue this discussion elsewhere. Once again, thank you very much, everyone, for all the very lovely questions that you asked. And Dr. Naji, for your invitation. It was an honor, and I'm very happy to have had this opportunity to present the idea of my book, but also to talk to our audience. Thank you very much for that.
you very much, and goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.